The Mafia boss hired a shy maid, unaware she was the assassin he had been hunting. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight over the hills of Naples when the ad was placed. A quiet notice through a private domestic agency. A large household needed a maid. Clean record required. Discretion expected. Good references a must. Nobody who answered that ad had any idea who they were really applying to work for. Dante Moretti was not the kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers. He preferred it that way. 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that never fully relaxed even when he smiled, which was rarely. He had taken over his family's business at 28 and turned it into something far larger and far quieter than anyone expected. He didn't make threats in public. He didn't surround himself with men who drew attention. He simply made problems disappear, and everyone around him understood what that meant. He lived behind stone walls and iron gates on a private estate, with enough security cameras to shame a government building. But recently, that security had not been enough, at least, not for the people closest to him. Over the past 8 months, 4 of his most trusted men had been found dead. No witnesses, no sign of a struggle, no way to trace anything back to anyone. The only thing left at each scene was a single paper crane, folded from a torn piece of old newspaper. Nothing more. No one knew who was responsible. No one had a name, a face, or even a theory that held up for long. The whisper that traveled through certain circles, low and careful, the way people talk about things they don't fully want to believe, was La Colomba. The dove. A ghost of an assassin that no one had ever seen clearly enough to describe. Dante had already paid 2 security consultants a great deal of money to find nothing. He had installed new systems, changed his routines, and eventually made the decision to let most of his household staff go. Too many faces he couldn't fully account for. His head housekeeper placed a new ad through the agency the following morning. 3 days after that, a young woman named Elena arrived at the gate. She was easy to miss. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Small in build, dark hair pulled back low, wearing plain clothes and carrying a single canvas bag over one shoulder. She kept her eyes slightly downcast, spoke in a soft voice, and said please and thank you, more often than most people do when they're nervous. When the head of security ran her name and history through the system, everything checked out perfectly. 2 previous households in Milan, both with warm written references. A record as clean and unremarkable as a blank sheet of paper. She was hired. She was shown to the East Wing. She was told, clearly, that the basement floors were off limits. She nodded without question and thanked the housekeeper for showing her around. That night, after the house had settled and the lights had gone quiet, Elena sat on the edge of her small staff cot and stared at the wall. Then she reached behind the radiator, found the loose panel she had spotted on her very first walkthrough, and pressed a thin ceramic blade, the kind that passes through any scanner without a sound, into the gap beneath the mattress. She lay back, she closed her eyes, and she began to count. Guards, their patterns, camera positions, which angles had gaps, which corridors stayed dark the longest, and where the timing slipped if you knew how to wait for it. Elena had been sent here with a single objective: locate and destroy a private ledger kept somewhere inside the main house. A handwritten record, decades old, full of names and payments, and quiet arrangements that stretched into places powerful people needed kept dark. Her handlers, known to her only through encrypted channels, had told her it was behind a painting in the East Wing study. The whole operation, if done cleanly, would take under 2 minutes. She was not asked to hurt anyone, just the ledger. What her handlers had not accounted for, and what she had not planned for either, was the man himself. Before arriving, Elena had built a picture of Dante Moretti in her head. It was the kind of picture that comes from reading files and reports and second-hand accounts. Cold, ruthless. A man shaped entirely by calculation and power, who didn't feel things so much as decide whether they were useful. The kind of person who is easy to see as less than human when all you have is paper. Distance lies. She had learned that before, and then forgotten it, and now it was teaching her again. On her 3rd day, she saw him alone in the kitchen just past 2 in the morning, standing at the counter with a glass of red wine and a novel, looking like a man who had given up on sleep a long time ago. On her 6th day, she watched him stop a heated argument between 2 of his own men, with nothing but 3 quiet sentences, and a look, then walk away without needing to see the result. On her 8th day, the elderly cook burned the bread badly enough that the kitchen filled with smoke, and Dante, who Elena had already seen reduce a grown man to complete silence with a single glance, told the woman it was fine and ate it without a word of complaint. None of it was supposed to matter to her. She recorded it in her head and kept moving. 3 weeks into her time at the estate, Elena had been inside the East Wing study twice. The painting of Santa Lucia was right where she had been told. The ledger was behind it. She had stood in front of it, close enough to reach out. Both times, she had turned around and walked away without taking it. Something didn't feel right. She had been sitting with the feeling for days, and it kept growing, instead of shrinking the way discomfort usually does when you push through it. The instructions from her handlers had small inconsistencies she couldn't explain. The urgency in their latest messages felt off, too sharp, too pressured, like someone trying to force a lock rather than turn a key. And the more she turned it over in her mind, the more a different shape began to form about what she had actually been sent to do, and why. The night everything broke open started with a sound she almost missed. It was after 3 in the morning. She was awake. She was always awake in the deep part of the night, an old habit that had stayed with her for years. She heard a door at the far end of the corridor open too slowly, too carefully, the way a door opens when someone does not want to be heard. She was on her feet before the thought had fully formed. 3 men. They had come over the northern wall through a gap in the rotation. The same gap Elena had noticed weeks earlier and had quietly noted to herself but never mentioned to anyone. They were not there to be subtle. They had the look of men who had come to send a message, the kind written in damage. What happened in that corridor lasted less than a minute. When Dante's security arrived, brought by a sensor that had finally tripped, they found all 3 men on the floor, secured with their own equipment, unconscious. No visible weapon anywhere near Elena, who was standing at the far end of the hallway in her housecoat with her arms crossed, looking like someone who had been mildly inconvenienced. One of the guards looked at her, then at the men on the floor, then back at her. "I heard a noise," she said quietly. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Dante came into the corridor about a minute later. He stood still for several seconds, taking in the scene. Then he told everyone else to leave. They were alone in the hallway. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He pulled a chair from a nearby room, sat down in the middle of the corridor, and looked at her with the calm, steady expression of a man who is genuinely trying to understand something for the first time. "Who sent you?" he asked. Elena stood with her back against the wall. She had 10 different answers ready. All of them were exits, ways out of the conversation that left her with space to move. She had rehearsed versions of this moment more than once since arriving. She used none of them. Instead, she slid down the wall and sat on the floor across from him. The movement seemed to catch him off guard more than anything else that had happened that night. "Not to hurt you," she said, "to find your ledger." It was more than she had planned to give away, but she was done building walls in a room that had already run out of exits. What followed wasn't an interrogation. It moved too slowly and too carefully for that. 2 people crossing something uncertain together, testing each step before putting weight on it. She told him what she had been sent to do. She told him about the encrypted messages, about the handlers she had never met in person, about the coalition that had given her this job. And as she spoke, something she had been carrying for days finally became clear. She had not been sent here to destroy the ledger. She had been sent to bring it out. And the people who hired her did not want it gone to protect anyone. They wanted it for themselves, to use in ways that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with power. She had been aimed at this house like a tool that had never been told the full truth about what it was being used for. The silence after she stopped talking was long and heavy. "The paper cranes," Dante said eventually. "Was that you?" "No," she said. "Someone else, using a name that was supposed to lead back to me. To keep me looking in the wrong direction while you worked from the inside." She didn't answer. The answer was already in the room. The sky outside began to lighten slowly. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Neither of them moved for a while. Elena told him about the server her handlers used, the access window, the location, the timing. She gave it to him, not as a bargain, but because it was the right thing to do, and she had spent too long doing the right things for the wrong reasons, to confuse the two anymore. Dante listened without interrupting. Then he stood and made 2 phone calls. Short ones. He said very little on either. When he put the phone down, he looked at her. "The ledger stays where it is," he said. She waited. "And you stay where you are." She looked up at him. "I'm not a charity case." "No," he said, and something shifted briefly at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like one. "You're the only person in this building who can find who's actually been killing my men. The real one." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the floor. She had arrived at this house as a ghost, invisible by design, forgettable by training. That was what she was good at, disappearing into the background, becoming whoever the job needed her to be, never leaving a trace of anything real behind. But sitting on that cold hallway floor in the gray early morning, she made a decision she couldn't fully name at the time, and wouldn't fully understand until later. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, not because he had given her a reason. She stayed because it was the first choice she had made, in longer than she could remember, that belonged entirely to herself. She went back to her small room, lay down on the cot, and stared at the ceiling, while the light changed slowly through the curtains. Under the mattress, the ceramic blade sat exactly where she had left it. She wasn't ready to move it. Some things take time to let go of. But she closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, sleep came before she had finished counting anything at all.